Um,
I muted it on my phone. It didn't, it rings into my computer.
your
Sorry.
computer. No, you're okay. Cool. Well, I appreciate we have our panelists, Ryan Reynolds, Akiko Miyamoto, and Wael Al-Fakir here. And we are here to talk about property management. So I'm super excited about this for a couple of reasons. Number one is selfishly, I think this is an area of opportunity for myself within real estate that I have to do better. Obviously, for those of you that know me, I have rental properties that I self-manage, but I've never really managed properties for others. So I think we've got three kind of different business models, but obviously in the same token, all of them I'm sure overlap in some ways and many ways. So I'm excited to hear the philosophies behind the strategy, and also give you guys, the audience members, an opportunity to ask questions as well. And I guess to put a bow on the introduction, I just really am passionate about the ability of helping others to grow wealth. And I think too many of us as real estate agents don't understand building wealth through real estate, and therefore we don't talk about it enough with our clients. And in my opinion, we're taking away the opportunity for them to have their best life. So hopefully those of you jumping on or maybe watching this later will get a little bit of information that you can pass along to your clients, and who knows, maybe change the trajectory of somebody's life or family. So with that, I prepared some questions that I sent along to these guys beforehand. So I think what I'd like to do is just start off with a quick introduction. So if each of you guys want to take a couple minutes and just kind of let everybody know how long you've been in real estate, how you got into property management, and just maybe a really simple brief overview of like what your main target audience is around property management. And then we'll dig into some of the specifics later. Does anybody want to volunteer to start, or do I have to call on you? All right, Wael, you're unmuted, so you go.
I am unmuted? Oh, you just unmuted me now. Okay, good. All right, so for those who don't know me, I've been with the office since 2008, and that's really when I got my real estate license. I started that really when I got licensed, and I did that because I bought my personal property. And I did that back in 2003. I bought a place and I thought I'll live in that place for 1 or 2 years, and then I rent it and maybe rehab, and then we'll go from there. But that didn't happen. I ended up buying that place and I rented it. So really my history goes back as far as that far. And the reason I got into it is one of my buddies happened to be asking me, hey, you have one rental and then you bought another rental just recently. Why don't you manage mine? And I'm leaving town, and it was around 2008. Why don't you manage my property? And I dug into it and I realized, why not? But I have to be licensed. So I went and got my license and I managed his property. But at that point, when I started beginning to get, okay, this seems to be something nice and I like it. But I've always had the mindset from when I was a kid that I wanted to actually have real estate. My grandfather, who was actually a doctor by trade, had always had land, had always had properties that he didn't, he just owned. And that was the wealth that he had used as a side to what he was doing. And by the way, he was a very accomplished doctor. So fast forward, now where I am today with the business, I deal with a lot of doctors and a lot of people who are either engineers or doctors who have always wanted to expand their life in terms of what they do, as other than the stock market, other than what they do on a day-to-day based business day. So, and I've been doing that for now, obviously since 2008 officially, but on a personal level since 2003. Yep.
Okay, awesome. And then just how many units are you now managing for other people? And then how many of those are your own?
So right now we are managing a total about 175 properties, somewhere in that neighborhood right now. We're adding on a monthly basis 1 or 2 on a regular basis. Sometimes for one reason or the other, there's a natural attrition. Someone wants to sell, someone wants to move, someone wants to do something with their property, or a 1031 exchange, that they would do that for one reason or the other, because they want to improve a property. But really right now we're in that mode where we are managing about 175 properties. Some of them are owned by my personal level. Some of them are owned by a family or my brother, and we manage those as part of that portfolio. Now, having said that, I want to mention and make sure that everyone is clear that we manage houses, well, single family homes, okay, and they are as simply saying someone that just built a home and they want to rent it, and that was their intention of it. And then we also manage older homes that people who lived in it and decided, hey, I'm leaving the country or leaving the state, and I want you to manage it. Those are the single family homes, and they're peppered across town. We also manage properties, condos, apartments, duplexes, basically any multifamily dwelling, and including garages, believe it or not. But we also manage on-campus properties. So, and when I say on-campus properties, it could be a building or two or three. Some of them are 2 bedrooms and up. And again, we're almost in the Columbus proper, and it's suburbs really, though, where we do that.
Okay, awesome. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about how long you've been in real estate, and then how long you've been in property management, and kind of what that journey has been like for you.
Yeah, sure. I've actually been in property real estate investment probably longer than I've been in real estate. I started off in 2000, actually in 1998, buying my first house as a flip, and then kind of caught the real estate bug before I was licensed, and made a bunch of money on that one, sold it, bought a truck, stupid, lost all the money. But that experience let me know that that real estate was where wealth was built. And I had spent lots of time before I was ever licensed, just like I used to live in Cincinnati. And so I went to the Cincinnati library, and I've literally checked out every book on real estate investment that they had and read all those books. And then I bought a few books too, but back then, library was more popular, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so I got into it that way. And then so subsequently after that, a year or so later, I bought a duplex, and it was actually not in good condition. So I rehabbed one side of that, put a tenant in that, rehabbed the other side, put a tenant in that. And I bought that one for $70,000 or $72,000 back then. And then I sold that a few years later for about $172,000 when I did a reverse 1031 exchange up to Columbus from Cincinnati. And so somewhere in the middle there, I realized that real estate agents were making a lot of money, and I realized that I wanted to be in real estate. And so I got my license in, I think, 2001. And I continued to work my full-time job until about 2008, when I went full-time into real estate in Columbus, thinking that there's a slight downturn about that time. I thought it'd be over quick and we'll be cranking again. So at that time, I bought a 10-unit building here that I owned myself. And then I kept the house that I moved up here when I built another house. And so kind of like Whale, I bought homes that I lived in and then started managing them for myself. And then I realized that once I got to around 20 or so homes, I needed better systems and better, or 20 or so units, needed better systems, better things. And so those were expensive and I didn't want to pay for them. So I decided if I started managing for other people, then I could actually offset. It's a completely selfish reason for the most part, but just wanted to have someone else pay for my own property management. And so we started buying the tools like Buildium and that sort of thing, and developing the networks and the things that I needed. And so right now, I guess, bringing all the way to today, I own around, with my dad, he's my business partner, I think we own around 30 units, something like that. They're mostly in the Delaware area, and I actually have 10 up in Portage County up near Kent State University where he lives, which if you know anybody who wants to buy, we're selling right now. But anyway, and I manage about another 25 or so. So I think we're about 50, 55 units, somewhere in that range. Mostly single family and duplex. We do have some apartments. And my focus really is Delaware, the local area of Delaware County. And we would do northern Franklin County, but not very far down in. So we're very, very much, and in Union County also, or Marysville at least. very focused and really not willing to go outside of that area very much, to be honest.
Okay, awesome. And we'll kind of dive into the reasons behind that from a systems perspective and things like that a little bit later. But last and certainly not least to Kiko, it looks like they're going to make me ask to unmute you. So if you want to go ahead, and while you're talking, I'll go ahead and share my screen with your graphic here.
Okay. We property manage about 64 single family homes, all in Dublin School. I moved to Columbus area from Tokyo in 2010. Before I got licensed, the first thing I did was I bought a 4-unit apartment. That's how I started. In 2011, I got licensed and I bought my home, and I rented my room upstairs, 4 rooms, for $700 each to an international student. So everything has been like investment property to me. Anyway, when I got licensed, I quickly found out the Japanese population and community here do not purchase because they are expats and they're working for Honda and their suppliers. When they are assigned to come to work here on work visa, they average come like 4.5 years here. They are not allowed to purchase a home by company rule, but they have to rent a home. That's very unique to, I think, Japanese expats here. As you know, in Dublin, nobody, tries to rent a home because it's been still reasonable. So you purchase a home if you have a steady income. So it was a struggle. There was a demand of rental homes, but there was very low supply of rental. So what I did was I showed those inquiries or tenant to be homes on the market. And once they like the house, I turn to my investor clients. Okay, this person is moving into this house for how much? He has his company allowance, and he knows how long his assignment is going to be. So investor purchases a home knowing that they have a tenant for long term at the time of purchase. So that has been my business model since 2011. And I created a lot of happy expats with the rental homes in Dublin City School. And also I realized that I created a lot of great study investment opportunities for local people. Then house price has gone up quickly, but not the housing allowance of the companies. So I shifted my investors from local investors to some started to call me from coasts like East Coast, West Coast, where they can't show cash flow there, but we could here still. And then I have a monthly investor seminar now. It's online in Japanese, so I have a lot of Japanese investors buying from Japan. So initially, I was not thinking about property management, but when I started to sell the houses to a foreign investor, they can't manage their own homes here. And they have to be told, like, you have to file taxes for your income. So that's how I got into property management. And that right now we have 64. When I started doing this, one doctor, she's a acupuncturist. She bought 10 homes with me. And she was originally thinking of having a second clinic. But she said, wait a second, it's easier that I just keep buying homes with you and put the expats in. They don't leave for 4 to 5 years. So like I was just gonna continue to do that instead of having the second clinic. And she said after like 5th or 6th, thanked me like, Kiko, thank you very much. You created my retirement. I can retire. I can see my future. So I felt I was very honored, but at the same time, she was only 10 years older than me. And if I quit my business, her retirement would disappear too. That's when I realized like I can't be on my own. So I started to build a team now. We are 5 of us, including the one in Japan. So that's how my business has been.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I definitely have a lot of questions, and maybe some other people will too, about your business model that we'll dig into as we move along here. So, all right, well, I'm gonna just kind of pick on each one of you one at a time. So maybe Akiko, since you're already unmuted, I'll just continue with you if you're okay with it. I would say definitely by far out of the three of you, you have what would be considered the least traditional property management and slash business model. And yet I love so many of the things that you said around wealth building and the fact that you feel like you have an obligation to your clients to build a big business, because it's not just all about you. So many good nuggets in there. But how the way that you've transitioned over like the last 10 years, as you went from working with local investors, then to going on the coast, and then now at the end, you kind of snuck in something that I caught because I know a lot about your business from your transition over to KW. But tell everybody a little bit about what your team member in Japan is doing and how you've begun to not necessarily transition, because I think you're open to owners from Columbus, California, or Japan, but how has bringing Japanese investors into the fold helped you to make sure that you can continue providing those rental properties?
So when I started, the price range of doubling homes were anywhere between $200,000 to $250,000. So with $40,000, $50,000 down payment, which is 20% of the home, it was very easy to find anybody. I mean, anybody could technically be an investor because there's no risk factor. Soon as you purchase and close, you have income coming. Even before your first payment of the mortgage, you have security deposit, 1 month's rent comes. And those are the people who are receiving housing allowance from the company. So you never do not have to worry about, you do not get paid on time. So, so that's how I started. And then I think the price range right now is anywhere between 330 to 370, 80. And the housing allowance being like, 2,300 to 2,600 has been the budget. So the cash flow and return got tight. Most of the foreign investors, they're ready to purchase all in cash. So the interest rate didn't matter, and return, they have a little bit more space than some of the investors. Before COVID hit, the price of the financing was getting a little expensive, and property tax was going up. So it was getting difficult to show the cash flow with the local investors, unless they're like owners of the owners of the restaurants, cash business people. They're afraid to, put the cash in, checking account, and they want to change it into something more tangible. That's different. But that's how I got into naturally somebody who has more tolerance, because in Japan, the interest rate is so low, like 0.02% savings account. So it's a no-brainer. If you can gain like 3%, 4% return, that's good enough for Japanese.
Okay, awesome. So obviously, like you said, then as you transition to out-of-town investors, your need to do more of the property management became larger. So what does that process look like? Well, how do you handle, so you're obviously really almost prospecting. You have this group of tenants coming in over from Japan that aren't allowed to buy here because it's company policy. And so they're going to be staying in a property for 3 to 5 years. So then you're going and selling basically a tenant with a house to an investor with as close as a guaranteed return as you can get. So then after closing, what does your relationship with the investor look like? What's your commitment to them, and what do they pay you for that commitment?
So foreign investors, we tell them that we have the property managed because they can't call a repair person from, Japan with the time difference anyway. We charge 8% of the rent. When it goes vacant, we charge $100 per month because, some certain maintenance and calling on the house is required. What we do is that we are the ones that were here to organize any of the contractors. And we do moving walkthrough and move out walkthrough. And we report what happened after the move out walkthrough. And we divide it into what's on tenant, what's on the landlord, what kind of renovation is needed, advised by us to, avoid the vacancy. And that's what we do for 8%. We do not get involved in accounting, but we pay for the foreign investors because a lot of contractors want to be paid by checks, and that cannot be taken care of from Japan or foreign country. So those are the things that we do.
And then they reimburse you once you've paid for the repair?
They give us a check, so we write their checks.
Okay. And then so do you charge also when there is a vacancy if they want to re-rent it, or are oftentimes those investors selling the property once the tenant moves out?
They like to keep it for long term. So they pay another 1 month rent as a finder's fee for the next tenant. And occasionally time comes for investors to liquidate, or they do 1031 and we help them sell. If the tenant is in the house, we try to find another investor for them. If they want, they can, they're selling after the tenant is vacated, then yeah, we list it on MLS.
Okay. And when you sell from one investor to another, what type of, do you make an adjustment, or are you selling at market value? Like, do you make an adjustment when you sell off market like that in terms of, because obviously when you can sell to an owner occupant, there's a lot of advantages from a price perspective. But if you have a tenant in there with an existing lease, you don't really have the ability to sell to an owner occupant. So is there any price adjustment in terms of the value, or is it pretty much market? Do you get an appraisal done? How do you handle that?
So we typically walk through the house first and find out what needs to take place to bring to par at the market price. So if, the moving ready house is, sold for $400,000, and we walk through the house with a contractor that needs like $20,000 of work, then, we suggest to the investor or seller, you can sell it for $400,000 and give the check for $20,000 at closing. That's what we typically handle.
Okay. So you basically create an as-is value and then an after repair value, and then let the investor make the decision from there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Does anybody else have any specific questions around the way Akiko kind of has her system set up with her different investors? No? All right. Well, we'll have more Q&A later. So definitely if you guys think of something. All right. Awesome, Akiko. I'm going to move on to Weil, you're next in line here. So, and on my screen. So why don't you unmute? I would say that you probably have, one of the more traditional, when I think of property management businesses, you and Ryan definitely probably are more similar than Akiko is. But I think the way that you've grown it, obviously, both of you guys have started from managing your own properties and then moved into managing others. Talk to me about how you handle that relationship, and then also kind of what the challenges has been from a scalability perspective, because you have more than 100 more units than either one of them. And so I think it would be helpful for the people listening to kind of understand the challenges between you know, what you're doing compared to what Ryan's doing. And then also last question, I've asked you like 7 here, is, you know, at what point did you feel like you needed to build out a property management team? I think Ryan mentioned around like 20 to 30 units. But at what point did you get to the place where you said like, this is way too much for me to do on my own?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Can you hear me? I
Yep.
think I'm muted. Okay, very good. So you are correct. Let me start again. I am more of a traditional property management guy, the model that we were working on. And you are correct that I've started with, you know, first on the personal level, and it was somewhere between the 25 and 30. Ryan is accurate when I realized I needed help. And originally that help was more on the administrative scale of things, because I was also doing my other job. I was, by the way, I didn't mention this, but I was an engineer early on at that time, but then I became a project manager. So it kind of lended itself to me in terms of property management and project management, and not diving into what I used to do more, but it gave me the skills in terms of managing multiple projects. And that is like, I look at each home as a project, or each home as a property management sole thing. And especially when you have an owner that could have 15 properties, or an owner that has 2 properties, their needs are the same. Scalability, they could be in somewhat different. So there's really a lot of, I see here, so, I don't know about the prerequisite of engineering, but I can tell you what helped me is when I managed my own properties, I was able to dive into them and fix them myself, similar to how Ryan had done. So when there was a plumbing issue, I was able to go and do it. When I had an electrical issue, I was able to do it on my own. And not to kind of, it just lended itself to me based on my experiences of the past. But to be honest with you, anybody can do this. So this is not just because of an engineer or so, the background, and helps you. You don't have to be a handyman, because, you know, this, while anybody can do it, but not everyone can do it either. So you have to have a patience. You have to have an understanding of that, on how you deal with people, and recognizing how you communicate with the owner is not the same as the way you would communicate to the tenant. That they're different type of mindset on how they look at things. But back to the traditional side of things, I started getting help around the 25 and 30 properties. And then when we hit, I would say between 80 and 90, I needed more help, more consistent help on the maintenance side, more consistent way of systems and processes. Tools that we use became more important. And I want to say somewhere about the 60 mark, it was pretty important that we use other tools than just Buildium. So we use a property, what is used for project management tools, so that we can communicate to each other and update things on where things are. And of course, softwares that is property management directed. There's so many of them, and one of them is called Buildium. There's Appfolio. There's many others like it. But this is more of a financial scale of things, okay? Financial tools. But these organizations have also grown with time, and they have become, they try to house you more and more. So you can communicate to tenants more. You streamline applications through them. You streamline in terms of maintenance requests from tenants, communicating back to them in a certain way about notifications. Oh, you're late. We can do it all through those systems. So it became very clear from a resource perspective, you have to not only grow with the people, but you also have to grow the tools and expand the tools that you use to make that happen. I would say we all work remotely. So go ahead, you have a question?
Yeah, well, so I just wanted to kind of go back and clarify 2 things. So you said right around 20 or 30 units is when you got one piece of leverage. So what was that? And then at 80 or 90 units, you said you added another piece of leverage, and somewhere in between there, you recognized the value of the software system. So could you drill down into more specifics about what leverage you added at those places?
Yeah, so good. Go ahead. More?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I resource perspective, I needed someone to be able to do some of the administrative work, okay? So it was more of a back office communication and follow through to make sure, when I'm skimming through a lease, that someone else is populating what's already known for us, for example, okay? Running through applications, collecting things that are missing from an application, for example, okay, for people. And then, of course, as the properties grow, what happens, the move-ins and move-outs begin to grow. So that means you have to have a more consistent maintenance crew, that you're not just dealing with just the guy that you just call in once or twice a month. You have to have some more consistently with people. And that was one piece that had to become solidified somewhere around the 60, 50 properties. You needed more consistency. And I went through a series of folks until I got the right person. But I want to jump from that 60 mark to where I am 120 mark, okay? It became very apparent that that gem that I found, that handyman that could do jack of all trades, but yet could go in and understand how we operate in terms of sending the work orders and receiving the work orders and the repair and doing them in time and how to communicate to tenants and back and forth. Now it becomes, how can you grow that person to manage or maintain maintenance perspective, the 150 and 180 properties, okay? Because you need more of that person. And when you begin to see some gem, and I'm just gonna call that Jim, and I'm gonna name him Jim. How about this? I'm gonna name him Jim. So when you have Jim available and able to do it, you begin to realize there's gonna be more resources needed. Suddenly now you're gonna begin to need cleaning folks, people that clean appropriately. Some of them are electrician, because sometimes you're going to get into an electrical problem that a handyman cannot do. A plumbing thing that the snake of the handyman guy is no longer going to be able to do it. You have to be able to tap into people who are more in the trade side of things and be networked well with them when it goes beyond the normal thing. And I think tapping and always constantly, continuous improvement is what I would call it. Continuous improvement throughout the whole period. You have to always find someone and always have a backup for anybody that you're doing. And to be honest with you, I recognize that somewhere about the 60 properties. It's funny that you asked about that number, that not only I have a handyman number one, and I have a handyman number two, and then I have a backup to that guy. And where we are today, I'm still in that model. I have number one, and I have number two, and I have number three. And that goes to HVAC, that goes into plumbing, that goes into electrical, that kind of goes across, in fact, landscaping, because now we do a lot more of properties outside. We have to have people that clean gutters, people that can, mow the grass. Even when we provide the service, on an initial basis, when between move-in and move-outs, that service becomes important. So I want to take a step back a little bit and tell you, at the 20 mark, it was mostly using contractors and some administrative work in terms of resources. As we begin to get into the 60 and the 80 mark, you have to have more consistent maintenance people that you currently use, that you can trust, that can react and respond and know how to communicate with tenants, okay? But then you have to grow their skills, okay? And that is now the skills that was a handyman, now it becomes more important in terms of the cleaning and more important on the specialty trade of things. I hope that answers what you were looking for there.
Yeah, so what, go ahead. No, go ahead, Ryan.
This is where I want to learn from Whale, especially after a while, I should say. So are you saying at 60 to 80, you put those people on staff, or are those people all subcontractors at that point still?
That's a good point. Somewhere between 30 and 60 to 80, there were still on the contractor side of things. I tried to hire staff, but everyone would either be there for a short period of time or they just want out because they feel that they could be subcontractors forever because they make more money that way, okay? But, and it takes a long time. And I think somewhere the way you should have someone on staff, to be honest with you, somewhere about 120 and above, okay? You should really begin to have that. And if you don't, you need someone that you can trust, that at least they recognize that you are 75% of their business or 80% of the business, and that they recognize that and you recognize that, so you treat them that well, they treat you well. Believe me, even when we were on the 50 and the 60 and the 80 mark, when I would tell someone, I need you to do something, they jump. I mean, and I'm not saying that they're going to stop what they're doing, but I can tell you they'll be able to fit it and they will make it happen. And that relationship becomes extremely sensitive and important, that not only that they're doing you, it's not they're doing me a favor, they're getting paid for that, okay? But it becomes important on how you're networking with them, how you're working with them, how you flow the information to them. You know, I don't just, hey, go fix this heat. So if I don't have that understanding, heat issue at property A, it's important that my staff or someone within our staff that contacts the tenant and says, hey, you put this thing in our tenant portal and you said no heat. What does that mean? Is the fan blowing or not? Is it just blowing cold air or warm air? What's going on there? Is there any pulse? Is the switch trip? So to be honest with you, early on, between the 30 and the 60, it was more resources in terms of the staff in the administrative world would be important. As you get into the 50 and 60, and then you go into the hundreds, at this point right now, while the administrative aspect of it is important, but the maintenance aspect of it becomes even more important. And going back to the traditional side of property management, to be honest with you, one of the most important thing is right now is a quality and trusted maintenance staff, and growing them, and including complemented by other contractors that you use on an occasional basis, on a regular basis, whether I'm buying a house or selling a house and fixing it for an owner or property that we're managing on all fronts.
Okay, awesome. I think that's helpful. Ryan, did you have any other follow-ups around that?
Probably a lot of follow-ups. I mean, one of the big things you might notice on this is that like there's no red book as far as I know for property management. I mean, me hearing these questions answered is really helping me, because it helps me to plan where I need to put, or where I need to think about having staff on help. Because a red book makes it easy. There's a model. It makes you really appreciate it. And you get to this number of transactions, you hire your first admin. After that, you hire a second admin. There is no such thing in property management. However, I think there's a parallel. It just doesn't seem like there's a book out there. So I think where I'm at right now, I'm at probably 50, 55, whatever it is. I definitely feel the need to have more dedicated staff. And when people get busy, it's tough because I don't have enough business to give them yet, but I'm not necessarily, I have a fair amount of business. So, I mean, I can't be their only customer is what I mean. So yeah. It's a great point, I think, to say that it really is about scale. When you think about what the value is you're adding. So when you think about who hires a property manager, like why would somebody hire a property manager? It's because they don't have these things. And what the value is you can bring as a property manager is, number one, expertise. Whale talked about, and he really kind of glossed over, like, yeah, I know how to do HVAC, electrical, plumbing. You don't need to know it, but I mean, I think you do need to know a certain degree of it, because you have to be able to troubleshoot and save your owner's money. The reason they need you is because most people don't know how to change a light bulb, let alone know if the sump pump just needs, plugged back in, or if it needs changed or whatever. And so there's a lot of expertise that goes, and experience, frankly, that goes along with knowing how to do things efficiently and cost effectively. And that comes from experience. Now you can probably get that experience maybe from YouTube if you're really super fast at watching YouTube, and do it on double speed for whenever you have problems, and just be dedicated to learning it. But I mean, his experience is clearly, you don't have to be an engineer, although I am an engineer too, but you don't have to be an engineer to do that. However, I think he seems to point out the fact that he liked doing that stuff in the beginning. He likes systems, understanding what breaks and how to fix and those kind of things. And then that naturally translated into understanding how things work. And that naturally translated into being able to troubleshoot over the phone, which is what he just said with the HVAC problem. So, and what that means is you're actually saving a lot of money, because you're not only sending out a guy to fix the heat, you're sending out a guy that needs to replace the blower fan, or the thermostat needs a new battery. Completely different skill set. And that's where one way he can add, or he does add value to his owners. So I don't know if I just rambled there too much.
No, you're 100% right. 100% right. In fact, it is extremely important for me to understand the challenges of a particular item, because that lends itself to what else could that person do. And you're right. And to be honest with you, sometimes I think it was a plumbing issue. I'll give you an example here. Oh, I have water. It's over behind the kitchen sink. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's maybe a dishwasher, or is this a disposal? So now I talk to them to understand, is this an appliance guy that's going there? Or is it a guy that's just going to be a plumber? Those are two different trades. Now, I might have the handyman that could do one of those two in terms of low skill aspect of it. But if it becomes more complicated on the appliance thing, I need an appliance person. But believe it or not, I just mentioned those two, but it turned out to be an HVAC problem, because in the hallway next to the kitchen, it was a vent that comes where it just had an issue, and the vent was leaking because it was icing. And when they turned it off, it was dripping water, and it flooded the hallway right behind the kitchen sink. So it ended up being an HVAC guy problem, not an appliance thing, and not a plumbing issue.
Knowing
Well-
the questions to ask is the value. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. Number one, it's knowing the questions to ask. And number two, just like when we talk about building a real estate team, to Ryan's point, it is that the reality is one of the reasons why experienced real estate agents get a lot of calls is because they've been in the trenches and they've seen it. When we had the bigger team, and Ryan, Jillian's on your team now, the number of times she might be on here, there's like 5 Ryan Reynolds teams on here. But the number of times we had the conversation when she would get frustrated with, other agents who would, say things, and she would be like, I don't even have my license and I know more than that. We would have that conversation about, but the value in having reps, meaning that she was working with hundreds of clients every single year, and the ability to come and answer questions or ask the right questions, to your point, Weil, is something that people are paying for. And so just being able to send out a handyman isn't all you're doing, because the reality is most owners could send out their own handyman unless they're in Japan, right? And yet the question is, do you need a handyman or do you need an HVAC person? And the reality is, every single time that you have to send somebody out and the tenant has to be home to get their dog out, it's degrading the tenant experience. And so for an investor, the value of keeping that tenant in there, I mean, you guys probably are better at this than I am in terms of numbers, but I mean, it probably costs me, between a month on the extreme low end and probably up to 3 or 3.5 months to turn over of income to turn over a property on average, between having to get it repainted, having to fix all those random things, the number of calls that you get from a new tenant who's just like, I mean, a lot of the properties we own are older, so they have like their quirks with them. And it's like a couple months ago, we had 3 people move into our property. Only one of them had ever rented before. And so we got calls about the washer not working. And Ashley's like, what setting is it on? And there were like, she said like the refrigerator won't cool down. And she said, what setting is it on? And there were like 4 things over the first couple weeks. And so the amount of calls and headaches that you get, if the tenant is annoyed by the fact that every time there's a problem, you have to send 5 people out, versus Weil would have sent 1 out because he would have asked all the right questions up front. So that's awesome.
One
Yeah.
thing I did for that is that every time we get a call from a tenant with a complaint or problem, we accumulated the knowledge and made it into a house manual. So we spend about 1 hour walk through the house explaining how to use certain things. Don't assume they know how to use certain things, right? And on top, we created the manual. So if you want, if something happens, it's in here. Please look it through first before you call us. And if you still can't solve the problem, here is the form. And there's an online form that they can fill in what happened before that happened and what's the problem. And then they can attach the picture. So we received our entire team received the form. So somebody who is available can react quickly.
Interesting that you bring that up because in the last 2 to 3 weeks, to be honest with you, we've been working on this very thing right now, my team and I, and especially headed by my brother, who's managing mostly right now the maintenance side of things, and we're developing what we call frequently asked questions by tenants and owners really as well. But these things now we're going to begin to hand it over at the move-in with the keys. Okay, and then later it's going to be, and we're developing our online presence here more, where we can direct them to, hey, I have a question about this. Well, here's a list of things. Now, some of them could be very unique and generic, either generic or unique, but we can kind of overcome that depending on the type of property we're talking about here.
That's awesome. All right, Ryan. So for you, actually, one more question for a while, and then this is going to transition over to Ryan. So how many of your properties or your family properties that you have an interest in how many of those 175 are either owned by you or a family member?
About 10 of them from those 175, about 10
okay,
of them, yeah.
perfect. Yes. So that transition into Ryan, obviously you primarily up until recently were managing mostly your own properties. And then what, 2 years ago or a year ago, year and a half ago is when you bought that business and you had some other people's, some clients' properties. So how has that transition been? Because you're probably the closest to everyone else on the call in terms of where you're at. So how has that transition been, and what things now did you learn over the last year or so as you like basically doubled your property management business from a scalability perspective that you could share?
So from a scalability perspective, I would say the biggest thing is, well, I guess the biggest mind shift was that when I don't own the property, I don't get to make all the choices, which is not always the best, because then I can make recommendations and things like that, but when I'm making choices for myself, frankly, I'm probably not as good as when I'm making choices for other people or helping them to make choices, because I'm going to give them, I might be willing to settle for something that they may not, I wouldn't want to recommend that to them. So a little bit of a mindset shift in terms of from a customer service perspective. And then also from a, I have to take into account each particular client's objective. So if they're going to be selling the house in 2 to 3 years, then I've got to be able to make sure that when I'm making recommendations on maintenance, that I need to get that house to a saleability position in those 2 to 3 years and make up a long-term plan in order to get it to there. So that's one thing. Whereas personally, I'm probably never going to sell anything I own here. I mean, the only reason I'm selling the ones I own by my parents is because they're retiring to Florida and it's paying the backside to manage it from here to Florida. So distance is a big deal. I think distance may be a square or a quadratic relationship sometimes. But in any case, the other thing I think is that the volume of, so whenever we're renting something, we have, the good thing is because you have scale, you have the ability to move tenants from one house to another. So for instance, when I have one house that's for rent now, for instance, and I've got 2 more coming up, I can sometimes take tenants who have applied for the one house and then shift them to the other one. So it enables me to keep my vacancy lower, which is probably another key value that most people who manage their own properties don't do well. They want to do their own maintenance and they want to do their own painting and crap like that. And it takes them 2 months to get it all ready to go again. Whereas we can do maybe 3 or 4 days. Even sometimes we've had as little as like, well, probably the shortest time has been 4 or 5 days between tenants. But that's a huge value because vacancy is probably one of the biggest factors in your ROI on your property. But the scale enables us to take tenants, we have basically a database of applicants, and when there's a vacancy coming up, we can use that to minimize that. The other thing I think scale does is it does produce a lot more problems. So when you have twice as many houses, you have twice as many problems. And so that becomes a little bit more where you can't, I could usually just used to with my own stuff, I was kind of borderline being able to handle it myself around 20-ish, where I would just get the requests and I'd make my call to my handyman guy or whatever. But then when I doubled it, there was no way I could handle all the requests and all of the everything else. And so we had to have more systems help us out. And so that's where, like the one big thing that we also that I really just took away is property management system. I mean, not property management, property project management system. As an engineer, I used to use those all the time, and I haven't really used that much at this where I'm at now, but that's something I think could be a big value to me. But putting in systems rather than winging it, I think is the big thing from scale standpoint.
I would agree with that for sure.
Cool. Yeah, and I know Akiko, you have tons of great systems too. So I want to transition the conversation a little bit because obviously I wanted to create a foundation of what you guys do. And then now I want to transition a little bit into kind of how your relationship as property managers can be with other agents and their investors. Because again, kind of going back to what I said at the very beginning, I feel like the property management piece, when you're talking to the average person, especially a non-agent, they believe that, you know, the only time anybody ever talks about owning and managing real estate is when they have problems. And so you never go to a dinner party or go out to dinner with somebody and they're like, oh my gosh, can you believe I have 6 properties and I haven't gotten a call in like 4 months? And I've been making like $4,000 a month. Isn't that so awesome? Aren't you proud of me? No, the only time anybody brings up the fact that they own properties is when they're complaining about their tenant, you know, overflowing the bathtub and ruining the whole kitchen, or the sump pump going out and flooding the basement or whatever, because for whatever reason in our society, we don't like to talk about good stuff, just bad stuff. So I feel like that's number one, the biggest reason why people don't invest in real estate. And then number two, I also think because agents don't understand what you guys do, they have concerns that keep them from recommending you guys to their clients, and therefore their clients don't own anything, and it's like a vicious cycle. So I guess starting with Akiko, what is your ideal, what's an ideal referral? Like, do you manage other people's properties that aren't in your like expat program, or do you primarily just focus on that?
Before we didn't, we only focused on the system that we were working on. But now that our names are out, local owners of the properties, when they want to have a long-term tenant, they started to call us. Hey, can we get the tenants from you too? So yes, we property manage for owners who already have a property to so like how we can get the other agents involved in our system. That's what we're talking about, right, Troy?
Correct.
So, I could think of a few. If you have somebody who already own the property and wants to, lease it instead of selling it, we can place a tenant and property manage. And then the time comes to sell, we can have an agreement that you want to keep that, deal for the future. Then we just, come to terms saying, right, referral based agreement, or we give it back to you. If, the property has a tenant, it's better chance that we have, client who would buy it from you. So you become the seller side. Or if you have somebody who is thinking of selling the homes, but they don't want to do any repairs, we have investor who would buy it and then, do the renovation, and we put the tenant in. So you can be the seller's agent and we can be the buyer's agent. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I guess the only other question would be if somebody were to refer an investor to you who already owned a property, is there any kind of referral fee that you pay back to that agent at that time, or is it only once it sells down the road?
I think that when you refer an investor purchase with us, we do all the transaction and we pay the agent 25% referral.
Okay, what about if the investor already owns a property and they just want you to manage it for them and find the tenant?
I've never done that, but I think it's just case by case, and I'm sure we can find a win-win relationship, right?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's awesome. Weil, what about you? What does that look like for you? I'll unmute you here. What does that look like for you? So number one, what's an ideal referral for you? And then number two, how do those referral relationships work? And number three, if someone refers an investor to you that already owns a property and you manage the property, do you refer it back to the agent when it comes time to sell? Or how do you handle that?
Yes. So it depends what kind of agent that, like, for example, an agent that sent someone to us that lives in California, hey, here's a referral fee of 25%. Thank you very much. We'll take care of it from A to Z. Okay. However, I have worked with some other agents that said, hey, these guys need property management help. Okay. We come in, we list, we rent, we manage the property. And at the end of that thing, either if they want us to continue on this relationship, which is managed for other tenants and further along, we do that. At the end of that, though, let's say 3 years or 4 years, when it comes to sell, I go back to the agent and say, hey, they want to sell. We have the talk. If you want to list, if you don't, we will list and we will do it and give you a referral. So it depends. But I would caution you on this because there was some miscommunication that I've had in the past. It is extremely important that you would have this conversation early on, not at the very end. Because at the end, you're going to have some concessions. Oh, I thought you're going to do this and I thought you're going to do this. So it's important to kind of have that conversation. I've had I'll give you one example. I've had an agent that referred someone to us and they said, hey, here's this, can you manage for them? And I said, sure, we're going to manage this property. And then they were under the impression they would list the property to rent, and then they would hand it to us and we would just manage for the duration of the lease. And then we call it a day. You know, it's an okay deal, but that's really has an issue and nuances that, you know, we can go in and have a dissertation on right now, because who's going to vet these tenants and how we're going to vet these tenants, how we're going to review these things. So there's a whole lot of other nuances on it, right? But I've also had properties that have come from other property management companies. So I had an owner that comes over and says, hey, listen, I have 15 properties. Can you take it over from management A? And then we had to go through the whole transition piece of that. And at the end of it, we would work with them. And in the property management agreement, it would spell out the details of what we would do at the very end. Hey, we would sell it to, or we'd work with someone, we give them 1%, or if you use us, we'll give you a discount on that because we're managing, we have so there's all that relationship that's discussed as you do that up front before at the very end. So, but to answer your question in a little bit more summary here, we manage by a referral of someone, we give them 25% if they don't want to deal with it. If the end of that lease term, another agent who lives in town, let's say in Dublin, we operate in Dublin, here's your client back. You can go ahead and list it. We're done. We're good. Thank you very much for the referral. We've had an excellent 2 or 3 years. So that's how it's done.
Awesome. And Ryan, what about you?
So pretty similar to Weil. I think one of the things that I would say is that we would not manage something where someone else picked the tenant, so to speak, because the tenant is really picking the tenant is where the money is, frankly. If I get you a good tenant, it is, and that's the beauty of Akiko's system, really, because she knows she has pretty good tenants, I would think, imagine going in. But if you have a bad tenant, it can cost you $5,000-$10,000 easily as an owner. If you have
it's
a bad
the most important thing.
Yeah, most important thing. So we have specific systems, probably similar to what Weil has, in that, we can find the tenant and we have a vetting system we go through where we do credit and background and rental verification and employment verification. And we want to know what their dog looks like. We have all kinds of different things that we do. And to make sure that they're not going to tear up, even doing all that. I mean, it's still a little bit of a risk. But if we have to take over a property for someone else, that would be something we really want to know a lot about up front first. In terms of referral, if someone would, similar to Weil, if somebody sends us a tenant or sends us an owner, we would give them a 25% referral on the first month's rent, essentially, of that lease. And then we would give that person back to that agent at the end of that lease period if that person wanted to sell the house. Yeah, I want to emphasize that the finding the tenant is the hardest part. And so I've learned on my own properties, to be honest, that I've learned by not hard knocks, big, thousands and thousands of dollars of my own money that I've used as learning experiences. So.
Awesome. That's great. I'm glad that you kind of put the bow on that, because I'm sure all three of you would agree. The tenant is going to make or break it. And the reality is if someone else chooses the tenant and they turn out to be bad, you would have to be charging a lot of money per month to manage the property to overcome the amount of headache and time that you're going to spend dealing with it. And so part of having a great property management, or just really properties in general, is making sure that you have good tenants that don't cause headaches. Because if you have a bunch of headache tenants, it's not going to be worth your while. So on the, all right, so I want to open it up here just for a minute. Does anybody have any questions that wasn't comfortable interrupting or typing in the chat for these guys on any of these topics we've chatted about so far?
No. Good.
No? Cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So to Ryan and Wall, that do you revisit the landlord/investor periodically, saying now it's been 1 year, we sat down and talked, what do you want to do for this property? Or do you wait until they come to you?
We actually have, that's a great question. And I think that whenever I waited, I got bit. So the biggest thing, so what we do is we typically, like 60 days prior to lease expiration, we're going to do a maintenance walkthrough and just kind of make sure everything in the property is good to go. And then we also asking the tenant, are you going to be renewing? Are you going to be moving out? What are you going to do? If that tenant's moving out, obviously we're going to communicate that to the seller or to the owner, and then find out if they want to be a seller or if they would rather continue to own. And then based on the maintenance walkthrough and tenant's plans and the owner's plans, make a new plan for what that property would be. So my thought is that you probably are better off to over communicate, just like in real estate sales, where you just tell them, if I don't ask them, they're probably not going to call me and tell me until I've got not enough time to do what they need done, the owner, in other words. So for me, it's better to know. And I think it really comes down to leveraging maintenance walkthroughs and things like that so that you can prompt the conversation. Because when you have to call a tenant, and I'm sure you know this, I'm not telling you anything, but when you have to call an owner and every time you call it's a problem, then I feel like that relationship gets strained. And so if you're calling them on a more frequent basis, maybe twice a year even, just to say, hey, just want to check in, here's what we're seeing about your property, the tenant seems to be doing fine, do you guys have any change of plans? I think you can probably learn a lot and build the relationship. And then if they do decide to buy more properties, then you're in a good position to take those on.
Thank you.
Weil, what about you?
Yeah, so I have different layers of when I touch. So first of all, I've been bit before when I didn't talk to someone and then realized that was a bad and terrible thing to happen. You must talk to them. I can tell you that I have one particular investor owner, and we would touch on a monthly basis. And quite honestly, we have so many properties for this particular person, a group, I guess, that every month almost we have one or two properties that are actually either in a move in or move out. Okay, that is on a monthly basis. Not only when we give them their monthly statement, there is always this thing, hey, you get your monthly statement, let's kind of go over it. If you have any questions, if you don't and they're simple, shoot me an email, let's talk about it. So sometimes it could skip one and then we talk 2 months later, but there is always that touch on a monthly basis. Then the mid-size, for sure, the mid-size properties, and I'm saying that somewhere about 10 or 15 properties, we definitely talk on a quarterly basis. In fact, if it's not on the phone, sometimes FaceTime. And I cannot emphasize that FaceTime is extremely important to me. That is extremely important. So if it is not that we're sitting at a coffee shop somewhere, we're doing a Zoom call, I need to see that person sometimes, okay? On a smaller ones, I would say between 3 to 6 months, maybe. When I say smaller ones, that's 1 or 2 units owned. I would still touch them on a regular basis. And I'm saying between 3 to 6 months still, depending on the type of property, depending on the type of relationship I have with that particular person. It could be as far as how's your family? You have a newborn, how's that newborn going on? And it might not be related to a problem, which is exactly to Ryan's point. You don't want to be talking to them when there is a problem. I want to have that conversation on a regular basis when this is a personal. So when I have an investor or an owner that I'm working with, it is extremely important to me, at least to me on a personal level, that I know that person on a regular basis so that I know what to anticipate when a problem arises. The magnitude of the problem is important to me. So, and then of course, back to inspections. Ryan mentioned, we want to do some regular inspections that could be on every 6 months or before a move out, 60 days or 90 days before a move out. We need to understand what that property is. Okay, after that inspection, hey, owner, it all looks good. Here you go. There's nothing to be concerned about. Or owner, there's 4 properties that look great, but there's that one that has issues. And here's what the issues are.
That's a really great point. Great question, Akiko, and great point, Weil, on the and we manage all of our own stuff, so I've never thought about it from this perspective. But I mean, it could have been years since that owner's been in that property. Sometimes for Akiko, never. And so, when they know a lease is coming up, there's probably some anxiety that comes around that for them, in terms of what the condition looks like and everything else. So that's a great point. One follow-up, Weil, to yours, especially having 175 properties, and you're probably, well, Akiko, you're pretty leveraged also. So I guess both of you, I'd love to know, is that a conversation that you're having personally, or do you have a staff member that has that? And then number 2, do you see that changing? And if so, at what point will it change where you start to hand those responsibilities? Because I mean, you will get to a size where you can't have those conversations and still run the business.
That is correct. And until I have the systems and the tools that allow me that and the resources, I'm probably going to continue being that face front of that. Now, I can tell you it could change. And because my brother, who is my partner as well, if he's brought in an investor into the game, because we are partners in this whole grand scheme of thing, he'd be the face person of that particular thing. So I already envision if we bring in and we grow some more folks who are actually agents, who are property managers on the staff side of things, whoever brings that, they're going to have the account, and they're going to have account A, B, and C, and I'm going to be taking care of A, B, and C. Now, we're always going to have to meet, just like we are doing here today, kind of concur and conference and talk about what is the consistency in managing the client, because the investors are really ultimately a client, just like a buyer or a seller, right? They are a client. And I want to remind us that the tenant, no matter how good that tenant is, he is a customer. He is not a client. The client is the owner and the investor at this point.
Cool. Akiko, how about you? I know you have a pretty good sized team and a lot of systems. So are you the one that's having that conversation on a regular basis, or is a team member?
So team members do, and our system for the term of the lease renewal, the automated email sent out to both tenant and landlord. At that time, our staff member follow up with the owner to see if they want to continue the lease or not, and see if they want to sell or not too. But then I lose the FaceTime with the owners, and that I'm afraid, but at the same time, I don't want to go back to, where I was, because I want to focus on growing the business. So what I do is that we started a monthly investor meeting. We just had it last night, every Tuesday, first Tuesday of the month between 7 and 8, between all the teams of us, and the guest speaker will face the investors. So they're free to attend, and they always receive the invitation to that. So sometimes they come in with their own problem or saying like they stay behind and say, hey, I want to sell or buy more. So I'm creating a FaceTime that way with the owners.
So what's your attendance rate in terms of the number of investors you have versus like who's showing up to those
About 10 to 15%
per month?
people. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Some are regular, some are different. I think that when time comes for them to talk to us, seems like they gravitate to attend the meeting.
That's interesting. So what, just a couple, like maybe your most recent 2 or 3 topics, what have the guests been talking about?
The investors.
The guests, you said you have guest speakers.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the guest speaker. We had a 1031 exchange expert attorney last night. Previous months was the financial advisor talking about how they can manage the whatever the cash flow they might have from the properties. Next month is the estate attorney speaking again. Different speakers. Sometimes we get like a HVAC person come, technician come and talk, or different aspects of owning the property.
Okay, awesome. That's a great idea. Anything else on that topic from anybody, any of the guests, I guess, in the crowd, or for you guys, for each other? No? Okay, cool. One question I had, which is completely unrelated to that, and yet it does kind of go down the line of staff. And I think I'm curious about this. And I also think from a perspective of, our clients, helping them build wealth. How many calls per property do you think you get? Let's call it on an annual basis. And how many calls per property do you guys track that? And if so, what is the number that you typically get? Don't all jump at once.
Tell you, it completely depends on the tenant. For me, if you're talking about maintenance calls, I mean, sometimes the tenants will do little things themselves, and sometimes they won't. And I've got one tenant that I'm pretty sure is, how do you put this? Well, I have a special tenant that calls a lot. And they don't necessarily call for reasons, something's making a noise. Okay, what kind of noise? Those kind of questions, I guess, well, we would be able to help answer. But it depends on the tenant. I mean, some people are more comfortable in a house and some people are not. And so now occasionally you do have certain houses. And so we do track all the calls. So any of the, we don't track calls. We actually track maintenance requests. And we use Buildium for that. I don't know, you guys probably use something similar, I guess. And part of the value, I think, one of the things I wanted to kind of mention here too is that if people are thinking about doing property management themselves, the big thing I would say is you have to really, number one, you either need to choose to focus on it or not focus on it. And if you're only going to do 1 or 2, you're really not probably going to be able to bring the value that you should be bringing to your client, because your owner client, because you don't have that scale of being able to shorten those vacancy windows. You don't have the scale of having the maintenance people that can come and get you a better deal because they know you and they know you're going to continue to give them business. If you're thinking, I'll just do it, I'll make a percentage every month, it'll be a little bit extra money, it's probably not a good idea, because you're probably going to end up disappointing the owner, and you might end up disappointing yourself. But to answer your question directly, depends. But if I had to throw a number at it, I'd say you get 1 or 2 calls from most tenants a year. And then from some tenants, you get 1 or 2 calls a month.
I would concur with that. It's all going to be dependent on the tenant. Okay. I mean, our look on the properties, we really manage, and we repair them, we fix them, we prep them between move-in and move-outs, similarly in many ways. Okay. So some properties are older than others, but we focus on that and we attend to it, because whenever we're doing the move-in and move-outs, we attend to those things. We recognize some of them are older, some of them are newer. But we have a checklist of things that we do between, different properties, and those are going to be always there. Now, there's unique things for different properties for different areas, but we touched on this earlier. the most important thing is vetting the tenant, okay? Vetting the tenant. And so when it comes back to repairs, it becomes also the tenant. So if you've accepted someone marginal in terms of a tenancy, okay? And they've had some background that, hey, they came and they, you know, pleaded this and that and this, and I'm going to be able to, I'm coming around, but guess what? You know, birds of a feather flock together. So whatever they've done in the past, most likely is going to come back again today, okay? Or in the future. So you need to kind of attend to it. So what does that mean here today? The amount of things that could go wrong in a property is dependent on the tenant sometimes, okay? And I don't say sometimes, I should rephrase that most of the time. So, and I will concur with Ryan, 2 to 3 a year per property is a usual thing. And if I hear 0 from someone, it actually concerns me. It really does concern me. So because of this very thing, we are beginning to implement something new, and that is a semi-annual or a quarterly inspection points that we're going to be doing. And that's another value added for owners. We're doing that. We're going to be putting it as an option. But what is not an option is the semi-annual. We're going to go in that property. We're going to check it out. We're going to see it, whether you have a problem or not. Okay, we're going to go through this. And that inspection has been developed. We're going to have pictures with it. It has a platform. I mean, I don't want to say it is like an inspection when you're buying a house. It's not that, but it's pretty darn close. Okay, so why is that important? Because there are tenants that will tell you nothing is going wrong until you have this molded and deteriorated floor, subfloor, and it's all the damage, and suddenly you're like in thousands of dollars where it could have been prevented by something small as a small valve washer, okay, or a small leak in a faucet. So, but anyway, not to dive too far in it. So I would say a normal home should have 2 to 3 different things a year, okay? A tenant that is regularly doing, I would say 1 every 2 to 3 months. And we're beginning to kind of like, what's going on here? Why is this lock keep failing every time? I mean, why is it failing? We use that same lock in every other property. Why is this failing here? You know, I'm just going and exaggerating it right now.
That's great. Akiko, are you seeing about the same thing, about 2 to 3 calls per year?
Yes, it used to be higher, but after we started to implement 1 hour walkthrough, explaining everything, you know, to the tenant, and then started to hand out the manual, what our expectations are. We also tell them, you know, when something breaks, what procedure we would expect them to take. It diminished quite a bit. And we started stop receiving, like furnace broke down like 10 p.m. on December 31st after that, because most of the time the filters are not changed and all that kind of stuff. So I agree that, you know, it alarms me if we don't hear from tenant at all. It's a good thing to hear from them, because then you can check the condition of the house at that time.
Awesome. That's great.
Can I answer something that was asked in the chat real quick?
Yep.
Because Patrick asked, you say if it's not okay to just have 1 or 2, how do you start to build a business without starting with 1? I mean, you definitely obviously start with 1 or 2, but I think my point was, if you're going to do it, and if you're not going to do it, don't do it. So Mr. Miyagi, I think, said something to that effect. But anyway, if you intend to start with, you know, to build that business, go ahead and, you know, start with 1, and then get the second, and then keep moving on. And as you go, you build the systems. That's how I did it, other than with my own, I guess. In fact, that's how I did with my own. The point I would say is that if you're going to, as a plan, only manage 1 or 2 or 3, you're not going to have the scale to be able to deliver the value that investors and owners really are looking for. And you may end up causing yourself a whole lot more problems because you can't leverage anything. So that's kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah, and I think just like we were talking about with taking over somebody else's tenant, the reality is, Ryan said it, you know, on average it's 1 to 2, maybe 3 calls a year, but then you have the pain in the butt tenant. And Ryan obviously has a lot of experience, you know, vetting tenants, and still sometimes they slip through the cracks. Sometimes they have a life change while they're living in the property. You know, maybe they split with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and that was the person that handled everything. And now you're left with the person who knows how to do nothing. And so the reality is, on some of those where they're calling every month 2 or 3 times, it's a net loss for you as a property manager, because really the only way you make money as a property manager is by not getting calls. So you're making money without having to dispatch resources. The second you're spending hours a month dealing with a tenant, the same tenant, you know, the 8%, you're not making money over time. And so I think, to Ryan's point, you've got to be serious about getting really good systems. And, you know, the fact that we're here today hearing from 3 very experienced property managers, I'm going to encourage you guys, if it's something you're looking at doing, you know, reach out to these guys, these 2 and Akiko, and, you know, and pick their brain and ask them what worked and what didn't. I mean, that's one of the beauties of Keller Williams, is that people are willing to share and help each other out. And I think so often our egos, you know, force us to go do it on our own, when in reality we could have learned a lot faster. So since there is no red book or millionaire real estate agent property manager, we have to go with the people that know what they're doing in our world. I think that was, or actually one other question that I thought would be fun, because a lot of us, I think, on this call either aren't property managers or maybe don't own properties at all. What's the one tenant property management law that you guys feel like we should know as agents who aren't property managers, that if we have, you know, a client who's considering buying a property, should know about? It'll be a fire round. So Ryan, what's your one thing?
30 days is all you have to get a deposit back to a prospective or to a tenant who's moved out. And if you don't get it back to them and get a statement as to what it is, you actually can have to pay a multiple of that to the tenant.
Good. Akiko?
I agree, but if I have to come up with something else, that I hear quite often that some people collect more than 1 month's deposit, 1 month's rent, more than 1 month's rent worth of deposit. In Ohio, if you can collect more than 1 month's rent, but then landlord owes a interest on that excessive amount to tenant when they move out. They should know that.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Weil?
They've touched on a few things that I was really thinking about, but
Well, I figured you're the one that's probably made the most mistakes since you manage the most properties. So you probably know more laws than they do.
yeah. So make sure you are handling applications consistently with all of them, and don't make exceptions.
Yeah.
So dig deeper into that and why that's important.
So for example, someone that has some type of, so you say no criminal background. The question is, what kind of criminal background? You know, this was just a small little thing when I was 18 years old or when I was 17. So I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying if you do it, then and you okay it, you just need to have a specific number, or you have to be consistent in handling all this application. So for example, a credit score. If you're at 650 or if you're at 500, you want to make sure that you're not going below that, and just stick to it and go with it, because you will only have problems at the end of this thing. Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's primarily because someone could come back and make a claim around fair housing if there was another, you know, something at play there, whether it's race, color, religion, sex, male status. If you make that exception for someone who's a single white male, and then you tell someone else who has a family and a dog that they can't get the same exception, then you could be perceived as discriminatory.
Yeah, so your process and the application need to be always consistent, and you got to stick to it.
So back to that whole systems conversation, which I know as agents we're also great at. But I guess I would be remiss, since Don Aldrich is on the line here and he's the one that kind of oversees property management at our office, to say that, you know, if you are going to manage anyone's property except for your own, you need to contact either Don or Greg or Dana and make sure that you understand the systems at the office and talk through what's necessary, because there are a lot of nuances when it comes to collecting rents and doing different things, and you need to understand those. Otherwise, you could be exposing both yourselves and the brokerage in a significant way, because it is a unique situation. So Don, come on, can I at least get a smile out of you for saying that?
I appreciate that, Troy. Thank you.
So I want to add on to this,
That's
but
the things I worry about the most, because that's what the state gets concerned about the most is people's deposit money, the collection of it, the security of it, and the accounting for it. And,
if I were to touch on wealth, the wealth of knowledge is huge with Don, and don't let him fool you. He is loaded with that information. So if you also have questions, don't let Don get away with it. He knows everything and a lot of it.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah, I've learned a ton today, so I appreciate that. The last question I had, and then I'll open it up if anybody else has anything, would be, obviously a property manager for most investors is either, if not the most important team member, definitely, in the top two for a long-term investor, someone who's looking to build wealth. What would you say, again, rapid fire, what's the one biggest benefit to hiring a property manager versus managing your properties yourself?
You can go on vacation.
All right, Ryan?
You get to utilize and rent knowledge that you don't have to pay the big price to learn.
Weil?
Yeah, no vacation. This is a way of life, honestly. I mean,
So what about for the investor though? What's the number one value for the investor for hiring you who never goes on vacation?
I will always find a way. We'll always find a way.
Yeah. So basically the average investor is doing something else during most of the other time. You're going to be working on behalf of them with their property, as hard as you can.
Yeah. And smart. Hard is good. I believe in also working smart as well. Hard goes a long way. And you need luck sometimes in life. I think any of those two would go a long way, but that's pretty important.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it again. Thank you guys for your time. And I want to open it up one more time. I know we've been utilizing the chat. It sounds like you guys are on deck to write a book. The Million Dollar Property Manager has been the proposed name. But other than that, does anybody have any other questions that I didn't ask or clarifications?
May I ask how you charge your clients for property management? Do you give discount to owner of multiple properties?
Yes.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think if you have someone who has 10 properties, it's probably going to need to be a little lower rate than someone who has one property.
Yeah, I've had someone, in fact, my biggest investor, the one that I meet on a regular basis, every time they add properties, I don't want to say every time, but on semi-regular basis, they remind me of, hey, we're adding more. How are we going to improve this further? Yeah. So I will always think about how we're going to bring more value to them doing that, and that's a continuous improvement thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Great question.
Just to that, one of the things I would say is that I'm building my business specifically targeting smaller investors, so people who have 1 to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 properties, and those people I feel like I can add the most value to, and therefore I can frankly charge them more than people who have bigger, more number of properties. Now, the bigger, more number of properties, not that I wouldn't take those essentially, but I think there's a lot of value to be added to that person who's starting off, have 1 or 2 or 3, and then they're going to buy more over time. So I think you just have to adjust it based on that specific situation.
Troy, may I say something to the agents who are listening into this?
Absolutely.
Of course, the property management itself in the beginning, especially when you do not have money, is more work than money itself. But it's just like a subscription model. You know, it's a small money, but that's one relationship you continuously have. So you have more opportunities to sell and buy with the same client than just a typical homeowner. So I think that's one value we decided to, do this, and it's paying us that we have continuous business.
That's awesome. Anyone else? Anybody else have questions for these guys? Or any other questions that you guys have for each other? Because I think if everybody's anything like me, I could just sit here and listen to you guys talk to each other.
So I have a question, Troy.
Yeah.
Not really, well, I guess it's kind of a question. So for those of us that are just thinking about investing and for ourselves, one, and two, helping clients to invest, at what point should we enlist a property manager? For those of us that are not inclined to know, all of the things that, Ryan and Weil were talking about, like troubleshooting problems in properties and things like that. So at what point and at what fee should we expect to pay initially?
I would say involve people up front, like early, because I think one of the things you have to consider is when you're working with an investor, when you're buying an investment property, you're actually buying the tenant and the tenant's ability to pay. And so when you're buying that property, you have to figure out first, who is it you want to rent to? And then once you figure out who it is you want to rent to, and Akiko has been brilliant to this, obviously, because she has exactly who she wants to rent to figured out. But when you figure out who you want to rent to, then you buy the property that fits that person or that type of renter. So you can, if you want to focus on lower income, you can do that and make a ton of money in Section 8, but you have to recognize you're going to have a ton of problems potentially, or a different challenge set, I should say, than if you're renting to single family homes that are in the 200,000, 250,000 price range. And so I think having a conversation, you don't necessarily need to involve one of us, but having a conversation with that investor about who it is that they want to rent to, rather than asking them what kind of house do you want to buy, I think that's a more important conversation to have up front, because then you can be more focused on what it is. And then maybe if you have those questions come in and ask, hey, does this make sense? Is there a demand here for this particular product? Because it is a product that you're selling. Looks like Whale is trying to say something, but he's muted.
Oh, sorry, Weil. I'll unmute you.
All right. So I totally concur with you guys about that, but you got to remember this is we can have a whole other session just talking about what kind of investor, because the investor, depending on what they're looking for, cash flow, longevity, appreciation, are they targeting low income housing? Are they calling middle? The type of neighborhoods I have investors that are like, hey, I don't want anything older than 2000. And someone else, to them, anything older than 1980 is old. So it depends on the type of investor. Some of them say, I only want duplexes and multifamily. Some of them want only a house. In fact, I have one investor that just, hey, I want to build a home and I'm going to rent this house. That's what they want. So you need to understand the type of investor you're dealing with. And I caution you just kind of getting a random person that's just reached out to you and says, hey, I'm an investor. I'm from Oregon or California or Washington, and I'm going to be able to buy this property and I'm going to leverage this. And suddenly now you're going and spinning your wheels, and you might spend 2-3 months spending a lot of time, and then find out that this, that they're not sure about exactly. All they want is a cash flow, and cash flow could be any property, but you have to really home them in. And that's what I would call client management or customer management. Okay. This is extremely important. And I'm not saying steer them away from what they are looking for, but I'm saying you need to have the conversation with them and better understand what their goals are and be able to recognize the pitfalls of that so you're able to assist them appropriately.
And is there a way to, because I do think what you just described is one of the biggest challenges that agents have with investors, because that process is so different compared to, I mean, it's in a lot of ways fundamentally the same. And yet when you remove emotion from the equation, which is what happens when you talk to an investor versus an owner occupant, it changes the whole conversation. And one of the challenges is, to your point, if they're a first-time investor, they actually still bring the same emotion into it until they've bought a couple properties that they do when they buy for themselves. And so it's really, as a great agent for investors, the key is learning how to talk to them and help them self-discover whether this is really something that they want to do. You know, we own 12 properties or 12 units personally, and we bought a lake house a couple years ago, and we rent that out Airbnb, but then when we go to the lake, we stay in it. Well, we have emotionally divested ourselves from all the other properties that we own. And yet the first thing Ashley does when we go to our lake house is walk through and try to figure out all the ways that the renters have screwed up her house. And so when investors come at buying a rental property the same way, and Ashley's jumping on here, she's about to like get me in trouble. But as soon as they come in and they start thinking about it as their house or the property that they want to live in, you do need to understand how to handle that conversation. Otherwise, client management, like you said, otherwise you're going to spend a lot of time in the future.
My question is, if you're going to help that investor, the first time investor, and purchase the home and close, then what do you do? I mean, you have to place a tenant, right? So yeah, the question about when do you need to hire us, maybe even before you purchase or identify the property, maybe you need to contact property manager to see if do you see any tenant in this house and how much is the rent.
Yeah, I
That
think
is correct.
that's great. And so on that, from that perspective, I think reaching out to you guys right when you meet the client, or maybe even right now, and saying like, hey, when I have an investor, is it okay if I shoot you a message once I find out what they're looking for and find out what rents are, or how long does it take to rent it out? I mean, imagine what value you're now bringing to your client. Cool. Lisa, did that answer it? We kind of went off on a tangent there with that one.
Yeah, what is the cost for property managers? What is the average? Like, what should we be quoting when somebody says to us, hey, how much does it cost to hire, property manager? Because Troy, going back to your original statement when you started, there's a lot of people who have a negative thought process around investing, and that's why they don't want to do it. They're like, oh man, being a landlord is a nightmare. You get those calls in the middle of the night, or how do you, and I'm like, you don't have to get the calls in the middle of the night, hire a property manager. And they're like, well, isn't that expensive? So that initially kind of starts the conversation around, well, what are you looking for as far as cash flow is concerned, and what are your margins and that thing. And I think if we have a kind of a roundabout number as to how much property management costs, that will help that conversation.
Yeah, Akiko, I think you said 8% plus 1 month's rent to rent it, correct?
Yes.
Okay, Ryan?
We're about the same, a little more actually. We probably 8 to 10, depending on the size of the investor. So it and then also 1 month's rent, and then we don't charge anything on maintenance, but on renewals, we'll charge a small fee on renewals.
Weil, what about you?
That sounds about right. It's really between 6 to 10%, to be honest with you, overall, depending on what the scope and the magnitude of what you're looking for. So I'm gonna just make it like this. So if you have a multi-family dwelling that we're gonna be doing the exterior maintenance and making sure all the exterior is taken care of, you're likely gonna be in the 10%. If you're looking at a multi-family home that's small, or a duplex, or just one that's brand spanking new, and it's just a builder just gave it, and you're looking at a 6% there at that point. So and then the range could change, or it could be 7 or 8%. Now that's going to depend on the number of properties as well. So again, the more the properties, you're hovering down to closer to the 6%. But when you're talking about 1 or 2, we're talking about 8 and 9%, or even 7%.
And Lisa, I think what the answer you're really looking for is how much is your sleep worth? How much is it worth to know that you're in good hands and that you are compliant with the law and not doing anything? And how much is your future worth? You can throw it in from a sales perspective, put in there. If you just want to tell them blanket 10% at worst case, I think that would answer the question. But really, the value you get from a good property manager, and not to say that there's probably a lot of good property managers out there, but I think, people on this call, especially, the value you get from that is well worth the cost, because it's going to return to you more than it costs.
Exactly.
And I think if it's a first time investor, your chances of them buying multiple properties is gonna increase exponentially if you hook them up with a great property manager. Because the reality is, I would say real estate agents are much better positioned to manage their own properties, because they already have we already have a team of like handymen and plumbers and people that we're already recommending to our clients. But if you think about your own situation, if you weren't in real estate, or ask a friend, if you needed a plumber, how would you find one? And they would probably say, well, I would call you. That's the average investor. They don't know anybody to call when things go wrong. And so definitely the level of work that comes from just those 2 or 3 calls every year is substantially more than even, an agent that's buying their first property. And so I think the headache is going to seem not worth it in more cases than not, and probably makes them less likely to buy more than one property.
And if the property size amount matches, we can introduce you to your client, the house that, tenant has chosen. So you don't even have to worry about if you're going to find the tenant or not. And that put a lot of ease on the mind for first time buyer, or even like second one, third one. I think it's great to have a tenant moving in at closing.
Yeah, Akiko's model is definitely helps with that. So, all right, awesome. Well, if nobody else, one last call for questions, and then I'll let you guys go. This was awesome. All right, if there's no more questions, thank you guys so much for your time. And we will definitely all look forward. This should be recorded, so it'll be up as well. And look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you guys. See you later.
Everybody. This was great. You guys are amazing.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks.